Mohamed Hussein, mashallah, he's a graduate of the Medina University College of Hadith. He's involved in the community here in many capacities. So we'd love for him to share his thoughts, inshallah. Without further ado, can we please give a big round of applause for Shaykh Mohamed Hussein, inshallah.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وبعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. You've had lunch. I need a bigger response. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. MashaAllah. I'm not going to do what some speakers do where they make you get up and do squats and stretch and all that stuff. I know most of you just had lunch. So, Jazakumullah khairan. It's great to be with all of you here today. And what I wanted to spend a few minutes discussing with you today is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We just prayed Salat al-Dhuhr, and several times a day we say in our prayers, Ihdina as-Sirat al-Mustaqim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, Iyaka na'budu wa Iyaka nasta'een, Ihdina as-Sirat al-Mustaqim. And what I wanted to talk about for a few minutes was this concept of istiqamah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala an absolute minimum of 17 times a day to keep us on the straight path, to guide us to the straight path. And it's important that the things, the items, the phrases that we repeat time and time again throughout the day, throughout the weeks, throughout our lives, that we take a moment to reflect on them. Sometimes they become lip service. And we're in our prayer and we just say Allahu Akbar, and we don't take a moment to think that Allah is really Akbar, Allah is truly great. And it's one of the cliches is that, the secrets of life are found in these simple things that we repeat time and time again. And sometimes they become mundane to us and they become like a lip service. We say Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. We don't even know how many times we say it in the prayer. And then the moment we leave the prayer and we face a challenge in life, we forget that Allah is great. We forget to thank Allah. So when we say Ihdina as-Sirat al-Mustaqim, we're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us to the straight path, to keep us firm on the straight path, not to allow us to stray from the straight path. And from prayer to prayer, from week to week, from Ramadan to Ramadan, from Umrah to Umrah, from Hajj to Hajj, as humans we find ourselves deviating. There's a lot of distractions in life. This life is filled with desires and doubts. And the secret to staying firm, to staying upright, is to continue to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this. And every time you deviate, every time you feel yourself challenged, every time you feel that I might not be living and worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to my potential, you remember, Ihdina as-Sirat al-Mustaqim. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us guided and firm on the straight path. And we're created as Bani Adam. Naturally, we are sinners. Naturally, we make mistakes. Naturally, we have flaws and shortcomings. But what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves in all of us is that we return to Him. Every time we make a mistake, every time we say something that we shouldn't be saying, every time we do something that we shouldn't be doing, we return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, oh Allah, keep us guided, keep us upright. A man came to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and said to him one time, asked him, he said, tell me something about Islam. قُلْ لِي فِي الْإِسْلَامِ قَوْلًا لَا أَسْأَلُ عَنْهُ أَحَدًا غَيْرَكَ. Tell me something that I'm not going to ask anybody but you. Imagine, somebody comes to you and asks you for advice and says, I'm seeking some advice from you and tell me something that only you can tell me. And the Prophet ﷺ responded to him by saying, قُلْ آمَنْتُ بِاللَّهِ ثُمَّ اسْتَقِمْ. Say, I believe in Allah, and then remain upright. What we're asked to do is to try our best to stay upright, to stay firm. Because this world, this life, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has filled it with tests. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ حَتَّى نَعْلَمَ الْمُجَاهِدِينَ مِنْكُمْ وَالصَّابِرِينَ وَنَبْلُوَ أَخْبَارَكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us throughout the Quran, أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. That do you think that you'll be able to just say, I believe, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to test you? It's not possible. Because that would just be a lip service to say, I believe. The true test of faith is when you experience something in your life that tests that faith. And we have micro and macro tests every single day. But what makes this era, this time and day that we live in, what makes it different from the other times and the other eras is that, back in the day, our tests were simply just our desires. Hey, I want to do this. I have this vice. I have this drug problem. I have this, I can't stop listening to music. I have this issue. I have that issue. It was simply a desire which is wrong, which is not in alignment with the teachings of Islam. It's something that takes you further away from Allah and does not bring you closer to Him. You recognize your shortcoming, you recognize your mistakes, you recognize your flaws. And at the very least, you tell yourself, I'm going to fix it. I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to change. I'm going to improve. I'm going to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. He says, فَاسْتَقِيمُوا إِلَيْهِ وَاسْتَغْفِرُوهُ. Part of being upright is seeking forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every time you make a mistake, you just say astaghfirullah. Even if you have to do it 1,000 times in a day. But in this day and in this age, the fitan are really just two types. The trials are really just two types. It's our desires and our doubts. And the trials of the doubts are far more powerful than our desires. Because that is the war against the mind. The war that's telling you that, hey, what you're doing, there's nothing wrong with it. It's fine. There's no issue. Someone told you this, your teacher who told you this, or your shaykh who told you this, or your imam who told you this, well, what they were saying was wrong, or there's some doubt in it, or it's not 100% accurate. We need to look at this differently. We need to take a different approach. And that war is far more powerful. Because now you start to do things and you begin to justify those things in your mind. And now you've been weaponized. And you might have some proofs. You might be able to rationalize some of the things that you're doing. And at that point, there's no going back. And in the day and the age that we live in an age where technology is abundant, information is everywhere, we have everything, we can manage our lives from these devices. There is an influx of information and we don't have the proper filters for it. How often do you get a message, a text message or a WhatsApp message, or you see something on social media, or somebody tells you something and you have no idea if what they're telling you is real, is authentic, if the Prophet ﷺ actually said this, if the companions of the Prophet ﷺ actually did this? We don't know. How often do you see people get into arguments and debates over the authenticity or the correctness of a certain issue? Why? Because everyone gets into these debates and these arguments and they go to Google and they start searching and they feel like everybody becomes a scholar all of a sudden. We have all of these tools that we are not equipped to use. Especially when it comes to this major major thing, which is our faith, which is the difference between salvation and being doomed, the difference between Jannah and Nar. We live in an age and a time where we are on the express path to everything. Anything that we need to do, we can do it in a matter of seconds. A 4-year-old child knows how to use a phone and call their parents, knows how to FaceTime, knows how to sometimes even send messages, how to record, send voice memos. We live in a day and an age where the resources that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us make the individual incredibly powerful. But also, we realize from the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam that our lives are also very short. And we don't have a lot of time to do good or evil in this world. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, أعمار أمتي ما بين 60 و70 وقليل من يجوز ذلك. Or من يحوز ذلك. That the majority of my ummah will live between 60 and 70 years old, and basically over 70 years old, you're on borrowed time. So time is going incredibly fast, and we have incredibly powerful resources at our fingertips. And if we use them properly and in a way that's in alignment with the traditions of our faith, then that could amplify our rewards. It can multiply. We could 1000x, we could million-x what we can achieve and the good that we can do in this world. But similarly, we could also doom ourselves because of these powerful tools, and we don't have a lot of time to recover from it. So this causes a lot of turbulence. And when there's turbulence, it's important that we fortify ourselves and that we prepare ourselves for it. When you talk about being upright, when you talk about remaining upright, when you talk about fortifying yourself or protecting yourself in an era where information is abundant, confusion is widespread, misinformation is everywhere, what do you do to fortify yourself? So to give you an example, if you're on a plane and you're going somewhere, and you get to your seat, and you sit down, and if it's your first time on a plane, then you might struggle putting on your seatbelt, getting used to this buckle. But then there's a menu and a guide in the seat pocket in front of you that you can use to figure out how to buckle up. And then there's also flight attendants on the plane that give you a demo before the flight takes off to teach you how to remain safe in your position. Why? Because at some point, that plane might experience some turbulence, and you don't want to be, shifting all over the plane. And what do they say as soon as the plane takes off? They say, we encourage you to stay in your seat. We encourage you to keep your seatbelt on, even if we turn the sign off. So all of these precautionary measures, just in case, if you've been on many flights before, some flights you experience a lot of turbulence, some flights there's no turbulence, you never know. Sometimes you're going into bad weather, you never know. This is the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These things are in the cloud. Technology can only tell you so much. Sometimes you can predict it, sometimes you can't. But you prepare yourself. And they tell you to take the precaution that even if you're sitting in your seat, even if everything is going smooth, to stay in your seat and keep your seatbelt on. Why? Because at some point, you might take it off, you might stand up, you might be going to a restroom, you might want to stretch your legs, and all of a sudden the plane gets turbulent. And if you're not prepared for it, if you don't have a heads up, if you're not in your seat, if you're not buckled up, then you won't be ready for it, and you might fall over, you might spill a drink, you might have to grab onto something. When there's this type of turbulence is not something that you wait until it comes to experience it. You prepare for it. And if you look around you, in this society that we live in, from the moment that we roll out of our beds in the morning, many of us, it's a bad habit that most of us have, the first thing that we look at is at our phone. And we don't know what we're going to see on our phone. If you have a bunch of notifications on, you might see the news, you might see your texts, you might see things from your social media, you might see something halal, you might see something haram, you might see Allahu A'lam. And from the moment that you roll out of bed, there's this the influence of the outside world is now encumbering your life. And even, you don't have to be a Muslim for somebody to tell you that you should, the first thing that you do when you wake up shouldn't be looking at your phone. If you're getting up for Fajr prayer, get up, make wudu, pray, worry about all that stuff later. But the outside world and everything that this outside world is telling you, which is many times not in accordance with aligned with the traditions and the values of our faith, is already beginning. That influence is already beginning. The moment you walk out of your house, what you see in your neighborhood, what you experience with your neighbors, in your drive, what you see on the television, what you see when you log into your computer, everything that you see plays a role in your life, and more times than not, it's not something that is promoting you to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not something that is propagating good values. There's a war on your mind, there's a war on your faith, and in order for you to protect yourself, in order for you to fortify yourself, you have to try and do what you can, do your part, to create, to the best of your ability, an environment that is going to protect you when you do experience that turbulence. What you put on your phone, what you play in your house, what you subscribe for and what you don't subscribe for, what you don't subscribe for, where you go, what you listen to. All of these things are subtle things. Have you ever experienced when you're walking around the grocery store and it's the holiday season, and many times you don't even notice it, and they're playing the holiday music in the background, whether you're at, Cub Foods or Aldi's or whatever, and all of a sudden you feel a certain way. And sometimes you don't even realize you feel a certain way, you don't know why you feel a certain way, because these things are very subtle. They're not in your face. There's not somebody in your face telling you to do haram. It's a slow trickle effect that by the time you start doing something, you don't even realize you're this far down this path. So you have to create this environment, and you have to do what you're doing today by putting yourself in position to continue to strengthen your awareness about what's going on around you, what's happening in this society, and strengthen your knowledge about the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sunnah of His beloved Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, so that when you do experience that turbulence, you're equipped and you're prepared for it. This is not just happening to Muslims, this is happening to everyone, every person of faith in this country and frankly in this world. There's a study by Gallup that said in the last 20 years, even churchgoers have decreased from 70, 73 or 74% to under 50% in the last 20 years. For context, the 50 years before that, it had only dropped 2%. So this is not just about whether Muslim, this is the war on faith, a society which promotes hedonism and pleasure over pride in your religion, in your faith. A society which promotes confusion over clarity. A society that teaches us to question the things that we shouldn't be questioning and to be skeptical of the things, and not to be skeptical of the things that we should be skeptical about. A society which is just slowly teaching us, look at ourselves, ask ourselves the questions, everything that we detest as Muslims in this country. We might still detest those things today, but we don't feel the same way about these things, or we're not as outwardly disgusted with certain things as we were 3 or 5 years ago. Why? Because these things are in our face all the time. So it's important that we revamp our faith like we're doing today, and we stay aware of what's going on around us. And you can't protect yourself if you don't know what's happening. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us and to allow us to fortify our faith and to strengthen us and to allow us to stay aligned with the culture and the values of Islam. Allahumma ameen. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum.